Okay, this is a Daihatsu 4-track instrument cluster from about 1986. Now, basically, I've got to try and make this compatible with the dashboard of a lightweight Landrover. Now, dashboard of a lightweight Landrover looks like this, but this has been chopped away even more than a standard one. I've done a lot of restoration work on this dash. I've welded new panels in on the two ends, so this is new steel here. These little red plugs here, I couldn't find the correct things which go in. Basically, is a series of little round square holes about 7mm across, and nearest thing I could find online on eBay were the floor plugs which go in on Defenders and so on. Am I focusing on that? Where's my finger gone? There. But they're about 10mm holes, so I took an angle grinder to them and thinned them down, and bit of filing and shaping, and they're now fit in there, and I can basically put self-tapping screws into them, so that works out. The steel work here had been chopped out in the past, and I've welded in a new section. I think basically the previous owner had tried fitting the Daihatsu Dash in, and the only way he could get it in was by chopping steel away. I take the other approach. I don't chop steel away from the Landrover, I chop plastic away from the dashboard of the Daihatsu clocks. So basically that means ditching this piece, then sawing off this piece like so, and that gets me down to a pair of clocks like that. So I'm sticking with these rather than trying to put Landrover clocks in, because Landrover clocks wouldn't talk to a Daihatsu engine and a Daihatsu gearbox. So I'm also gaining a rev counter, which a Landrover wouldn't have. Now the trick is, what I want to do is try and make it look as Landrover-y as I can, but incorporating the Daihatsu parts. So what I've done is I've got a piece of steel plate. I've marked it out to the size I want that fits over the dashboard section. I've clamped it and then marked through on the back where all the square holes were, and I've tried to centrally drill them in preparation for these plugs arriving. Now the plugs have just arrived today, so now I can continue with the work. So I've now screwed that up. What I'll do for the last point, there should be at least one more hole somewhere up there. What I will do is I will just self-tap that hole into the fresh steel I've done, so I won't need a red plug. So I've stuck that up inside there, then I've marked the line around on the rear under the dashboard. Then what I've done is I've slid the clocks in like so, so that gives me that. So now what I need to do is I need to cut out holes which are central to the two clocks to give me two nice round apertures on the front of the panel, and I also need to devise a way of mounting these clocks onto that panel. And I could pop rivet some angle brackets on fairly easily, one there, and then maybe one on each side, there and there. That would probably do it, and the pop rivets might even look fairly in place as it is a Landrover. Other option is I weld some steel on and I screw or pop rivet the clocks down onto the dash in that way. Not 100% certain just yet, but I think the priority at the moment is to cut 2 holes in there. I will also need to cut some holes so that these lights here shine through. Those are the indicator positions, so I would think I probably need to cut them about 15mm diameter in there so that the light will shine through without me having to mess about too much. I'm hoping the light will shine through and I won't have to extend the lamps up to the front, although I could do that. I've just rotated the dashboard over, so this is approximately where the clocks will be sitting when you look at it from the inside, but obviously these will be on the back of the panel. So basically the problem I sort of have is those LEDs might not shine through there to the front, so what I can do is I could mount these on the dash there. Now these are red LEDs with a mounting case, and they can be fitted in there, and then take the wires down through the bulb holders. See, these are the clip-in type of bulbs. These are LEDs. I'm replacing all the lights in the instrument cluster with LEDs, so I could take them out, bring wires through, and then solder them down onto the back, and they would duplicate the indicator lights. Same may go for the illumination lamp that's down there, but I'm hoping that that will still function and illuminate the clocks in some sort of way. I'm going to have to play around with that a bit. You can appreciate when this like plastic bezel went on, that went down pretty much all the way to there. So I'm hoping that the illumination LED would still light those clocks up. Or else, what else would it be of any use for? So I'm hoping for the best there. Now, the other thing I'm planning on doing is I want to mount approximately in this position about there. I'm going to be mounting one of the original Landrover gauges back in. So that's water temperature, fuel, and a charge light. And it's also got the Landrover words on, logo. So it'll add a little bit of Landrover back to the vehicle. I'll leave that approximately there. Now, over at this end here, I'm intending to mount some 12 volt and 5 volt charging options. So basically you've got your standard cigarette lighter socket, which you use for sat navs and whatever. Now here is a USB socket, double USB. Now what I find is if you get a lead for your sat nav which plugs into a USB socket, it's a more convenient way of powering a sat nav. Reason being that cigarette lighter sockets tend to fall out. The compatibility is quite ropey between devices that have to plug into these sockets. You tend to find on a long bumpy journey that they rattle out, so USBs tend to work better. So that's going to go somewhere over there. these pieces here have to be coiled up somewhere around the side and insulation taped. I've got to solder connections onto these for things like brake lights and glow plug indicator, and that one will be, I think that's I think that might be the fuel gauge. Yeah, that's a temperature sender. Fuel drain. Right, don't know, I can't remember, but it's easily found out. Right, so that's going to go over there. That's going to be about there. Then what I'm thinking of doing is I'm going to mount a volts gauge and an amps gauge, which are 52mm socket, 52mm holes. Then, if I've got any space left, which I think I have looking at it, I'm going to mount this little device. I'm going to cut the base off. Basically it's an inclinometer, and it was only about £2 on eBay, and I think that it'll look fairly okay next to the amp and volt gauge. I reckon I can mount it sort of in there. Obviously when it's upright it functions. You can also swing the side left and right, well, up and down, however you want to call it, to adjust it. It's really just a little bit of a gimmick, I suppose, but it'll sort of look quite nice. I suppose if you're going up a hill like so, you could read off the incline 20 degrees, 30 degrees, whatever. Yeah, it's a bit of fun. So I'll probably end up putting it in there and then maybe just hot glue it in. Then I can always take it out easy enough. Right, so that's where I'm working at, what I'm working at right now. So I'll start marking off the positions for my clocks to be cut out. Okay, I've drilled all those out. As I say, marked it all up, drilled it all out. And now I've got to do some chiseling and some filing. I have now mounted the components onto the dash. At least all the components I have. I've got the rev counter and speedo mounted, the original Daihatsu parts. I've got the Landrover fuel and temperature gauge mounted. It also has the charge light, which has to be fitted in there. Now I have noticed that there's going to be a slight problem with the charge light, in that the original wiring has a positive ground and it switches the negative to the light. So when I extend the wiring off the Daihatsu and onto the Landrover unit, that causes an issue, because this one would work the opposite way around. It would switch the positive and the negative would always be ground. So it's inverted. So that means I have to have a bulb holder which is isolated from the earth of the body. Now the other indicators which I'm extending off on wires are going to these little LED units which are mounting along the top of the dash here. I was going to put the oil drain one on, but since I can't actually see a way that I can drain the water from the oil on my version of my engine, I don't see much point in putting the light on. I don't see any particular place on my engine where the oil drain sensor is, so that one is going to be a spare for the time being. I did consider putting the charge light wiring to that one, in fact, and not having them in there, but I thought that might be counterproductive, having two lights on my dash which are saying the same thing, and one works and one doesn't. So I'm going to try and fit it in the original Land Rover unit. Right, so the LEDs I am using are a glow plug, so that it shows me the right time to kick the starter button over once the glow plug light goes out or comes on. I can't recall which way it is. I think it comes on. Then I've got brake warning light and oil pressure warning light. This little unit over here is what I showed you before. It's the little dash mounted, or top of dash mounted whatchamacallit, angle gauge, you know. Can't think of the right word. Anyway, you'll see in a minute. Right, so I've got to extend wiring off on these points, and then when I've finished with them, I'm going to basically insulate and hot glue these down out the way so they don't cause any issues. See, I've already done this one. I've sort of folded it in a Z shape across and then back over on itself. Right, so it's looking fairly okay. I've fitted my little cigarette lighter socket things over there as well. So this is how the unit is working out. I've sprayed it over in some cheap spray cans which a friend gave me. Army issue, it says, yeah, right. NATO green paint. Now I've sprayed it over in that. Unfortunately, the paint does not seem to be very good quality, and seems to scratch off very easy, which is probably why it was given to me for nothing. It's not very hard wearing, but I thought I'll spray it on, because that way I should still be able to read the words which I've stamped in: oil, brake and glow. These are the indicator points there. Now I've got LEDs mounted behind in the original unit here, which I can pop out very easily like so. These are red LEDs, so not the normal ambers. So they basically shine through those two holes there. Yeah, so I'm fairly happy with how it's working out. There's the inclinometer. Inclinometer is the word I was looking for. There we go. So that's not so bad, is it? You can see, tells you the angle, which you, of course, when I'm driving a Land Rover, it's probably going to be like that quite a lot, bouncing up and down. But for a few pounds worth of stuff on eBay, it looks okay. I've got a voltmeter and amp meter, which are coming from China on a slow ship, so they'll be a little while before they get here. But yeah, I'm fairly happy. That's about as much as I can do now before the meters arrive. What I've just done is I've used a 9-volt battery to test the polarity direction on the fuel and the water temperature gauges. Basically, by putting a 9-volt battery on, gives you a safe way of doing it. So I've hooked up all the wiring I can do around the back here now, but by putting a 9-volt battery on, you can check the direction the meter moves when you hook a 9-volt on. Reason I've not used a 12 is the meter itself, or the meters, are not designed to actually have 12 ran into them. Only 10 volts to give maximum deflection, as far as I know. That's what it says in the all the data anyway. So I've got meters to be hooked up on the voltmeter and an amp meter. Basically the voltmeter just goes between the POS 12, which is running around on this board, probably be that wire there. This wire here is out of the little voltage regulator, and that's fed to the 2 meters. So basically they drop the voltage from 12 down to 10 on a Smith's clock. Now on the Daihatsu, they actually have a voltage regulator that drops it from 12 down to 7. So there was a slight difference in the gauges, but as I'm trying to use the Smith's gauge, I'm hoping that the sender units on the engine and so on, and on the fuel tank, well, fuel tank will be a Landrover sender most likely anyway, so that won't matter. But I'm hoping that the sender unit on the engine will be compatible with the Smith's clock. If it isn't, I can possibly change the sender unit on the engine, so not a total loss. Yeah, it looks a bit of a mess around the back, but it's around the back, it's not going to get seen. I've had to solder wires in a number of points onto the circuit board and run them off to get them to the LEDs and the fuel gauges and temperature gauge, etc. So it's sort of understandable. I've put tape over the flap sections of the circuit board, which I've had to bend back over, and I've hot glued them down, and I've hot glued the wires down. The thing with hot glue is you can always warm them up again and take them off at a later date. Still got to do wiring for the cigarette lighter socket power, so I'll be doing that fairly soon, but they need slightly heavier wiring on than the rest of the dashboard wiring, because obviously they can take a bit more current. Right, so I'm going to get this mounted in the dash and see what it looks like. Right, I've fired it up, so it all seems to be functioning, well, to some degree anyway. I think the headlights come on if oh, that's the horn. Headlights come on, the indicator comes on there for flash it. The rev counter's working still, so that's good. Now, temperature gauge, I think the temperature gauge is rising, only slowly, but yeah, it's definitely moved up a little bit. Let's see, the charge light came on before I turned on the ignition, so that was correct. Not 100% sure about some of the others. I didn't notice the glow light come on, but it could be because I just didn't notice it because it's quite bright. The sun shining on the dash while I did it. The oil light, no, didn't see any of that, but I'm not sure. I don't think that comes on when I'm firing it up. The brake light, that'll be the brake fluid. Now I know that's not actually connected yet, so that won't be coming on. Yeah, but generally I'm fairly pleased with the look of it. The colour of the paint's not identical. identical to the rest of the Landrover Dash, but that doesn't matter. A little contrast is okay, makes it stand out a bit more. Yeah, that temperature gauge is definitely moving. You can see it's now slid upwards there. Now the question would be, will it indicate correctly for the temperature? That's only something I'm going to find out with a bit of trial and error, really. Hopefully, if it's going to do anything, it's going to indicate on the side of caution, so it will say it's hotter than it is when it, you know, when it isn't that hot. The wiring at the back, well, my mods are not too bad. I need to try and box this off, because it's all been chopped away by a previous owner, all the casing, so I need to try and weld or rivet or whatever a new protective covering around here. You can see it's all been chopped off, which is a bit of a nuisance, but you know, I'm fairly happy with how that's worked out. Once the two new clocks go in, the amps and the voltage gauge, it'll finish it off quite well. Obviously I've still got to work through the wiring loom, but I wanted to get the clock sorted out so that I've got something to hook the various points on the wiring loom up to. Well, actually, I know most of that's okay because it's functioning now. Yeah, there's the temperature gauge sliding upwards. Fuel gauge won't do anything yet because there's no fuel sender unit, because the fuel tank is stuffed here. It's a homemade fuel tank, previous owner has made in aluminium, and that needs to go because it's stupid having a fuel tank in the back, in the load bay, when you've got a dirty big space underneath doing nothing. So yeah, so I'm happy with that. I'm getting there. That'll be that's it for now then.